This is the public access beauty of this operation.
Yeah, very classy.
Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour. My name is Draxter. I'm here in the 114 Harvest Basement Studio, and today's guest is wonderful sci-fi author Kat Sparks from Australia. Hello there and welcome to the basement, Kat.
Thanks, Drax. Lovely to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, is this a little bit weird for you? How does it feel in full VR? Now, you're in VR. You're at your friend's house who happened to have a rig, and how does that feel? Is that very strange?
It's beyond strange. I mean, I have only once had an experience of VR before coming into Mike's studio here, and that was at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, the festival. And I went into a VR simulation of the latest King Kong movie had just come out, and I was in the helicopter being attacked by King Kong, and that was pretty amazing. And this is amazing too. It really is another world. It's
well, you're not going to get attacked. You're not going to get attacked. I can guarantee you that.
You never know. But you never know. It really is another world. And as a sci-fi person, I'm surprised I haven't been in this world before, really, you know, like.
I can actually tell you that I talked to a lot of writers, and a lot of them say, thank God I don't know about this stuff, because I would be absorbed and it would be quite detrimental to my sort of output of writing, because I would be sort of wandering through other people's minds and their creations, and I would be so enamored by that and mesmerized that I might be, just like David Foster Wallace suggests in Infinite Jest, I would be sort of drooling and eventually sort of kick the bucket because of the mesmerizing.
Look, I mean, I'm not a gamer, and this is entirely why I'm not a gamer. It's not because I'm not interested in games. It's because I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself not to get lost, and that would be the end of writing for me. It's hard enough, you know, keeping up the pace when you don't have a million amazing distractions that are actually imaginative worlds.
Right. Can you, we have a camera person here, and I just want to tell the folks who are watching this on the stream, please do let me know if we have audio issues. I'm going to glance at the YouTube chat, and Kat is now facing camera 6. Wave to camera 6, please, Kat. And
hey, camera
just want to give
six.
big shout out to Solus, who made your dress. This is based on a real dress. You gave us the photo.
How great is my dress? I cannot believe what a great job she did. I was so impressed.
And
I was
of course,
better
you
in
also
VR than real life, you know.
Well, that is actually something that when I interviewed the founder of Second Life, Philip Rosedale, that people do know in these spaces, and he says, well, everybody just wants to look younger and thinner. And I said, well, Philip, that's a little bit reductive, but on the other hand, my abs, look at them. I mean, it is true. I mean, I guess it is true to some extent. Of course, there's much more to avatar embodiment, but there is some truth to that for sure.
I'm perfectly happy with my VR body. Thanks very much.
Do you have blue hair in the physical world? No?
Look, I don't, but I think I might consider that as an option because I like it.
Okay, let's get. Oops, sorry. I am here in my public access studio manning the camera as well, and thanks to Granddad for the camera programming. So please bear with me as I'm grabbing.
Throwing my book on the floor.
I'm throwing your books on the floor. I have to apologize. So let's just while I'm looking for your books.
Okay.
Let's do a little introduction. I mean, Kat, you are, I guess, a known entity in Australia and maybe around the world even. I don't know. I enjoy your stories so much, and you have one novel out that is called Lotus Blue about it's well, I'll have you explain what it is and what you set out to do. But let me just say that I would I don't want to pigeonhole you or classify you, but I do think that we could count you into this category of climate fiction, even though it might not be intentional or your first sort of inkling. I read everything that you write, and I read your short story collection, and this exquisite new story called The Ship Sails On, and Lotus Blue, there is a component to it
Absolutely.
that is steeped in climate fiction. So, yeah, how would you classify yourself? Who are you?
Who am I? Well, I've just finished a PhD, which took me 6.5 years, which examines the intersection between eco-catastrophe science fiction and contemporary climate fiction. And that's the sort of process that once you get involved, once you get in, you can't really ever get away from it, I don't think. So Lotus Blue, I set out to write a science fiction near future novel, or not too near, but a future novel where Australia had been devastated by a combination of climate change effects and really bad political decisions. Really bad political decisions pretty much sums up my country at the moment. We have a conservative government that is not making some very good choices about our future. So I did a lot of projections about this in the novel. So it's an action-adventure story, but it is imbued with social justice themes, as is pretty much everything I write. I don't think we can get away from climate change as authors. I think all fiction will be climate fiction before too long, because that's just where we're heading as a species, as a planet.
And here's the book. I'm holding it into camera for Lotus Blue. Came out in 2017. As you can see, I actually think that the cover illustration is really wonderful, and it's about these caravans, and you see a lot of this very class conscious writing, which is wonderful. Poor people traveling, trying to make their luck in the big cities. These semi-sentient beings. The weapons that are still there from wars. Then I'm not sure if I'm misremembering that, but I think you do actually say something like old white man putting us into war, or some interior monologue where the character sort of muses about why are we always in war, and I think you put that
the answer is
on the heels of
patriarchy is the answer.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
No surprises there. It's set 500 years in the future, and the thing is, I like many science fiction or fantasy authors, I made up a lot of stuff, and then when I backfilled checking on what I'd written, I discovered I hadn't really made that much stuff up at all. It's like we really are headed for a very frightening future if we don't start doing something about it now.
Now, this is something that I ask every author in this genre, broadly speaking, when the subject matter is dystopian, projecting out, and there's two different opinions about this broadly. Some people have said that the constant sort of obsession with dystopian scenarios is actually limiting, and it's actually sort of paralyzing because it limits our imagination to what can we actually do, because it's sort of gets hardwired. And the other opinion, of course, is that these dystopias do serve as a warning, and of course in fiction you can put in a lot of the humanity, and we can sympathize and identify with heroes and with villains that may actually lead to more action in the so-called real world. I mean, where do you stand on this debate? Because the other thing is, then people say, well, there is utopian fiction. Why don't you write something that envisions a scenario?
About that.
Exactly. And some people say, well, utopian fiction is super boring because there is no conflict. And other people say, well, utopian fiction is exactly what we need to be doing. So, yeah.
Okay, well, first off, the filthiest word in the English language is utopia. Nobody believes human beings are capable of this. Nobody even believes human beings are capable of the other utopian word, utopia, which means a good place. No one even believes in that, right? So I don't feel, utopias went out of fashion a long time ago, and that is because the only way you can write a utopia is by having a place pretty much untouched by human hands, and we are not capable of that. So in our small and highly globalized world, I've always loved post-apocalypse fiction. I just, even when I was a kid, I loved it, which I must have been a creepy little kid, I got to say, but I love the fall of civilization narrative. And of course, science fiction.
Maybe that's an Australian thing too. I don't know.
Look, we have a very particular set of circumstances here, and it has definitely influenced what we write about. But I've changed my opinion pushing through my PhD, reading a lot of very miserable material. I've come to the conclusion that we need authors, science fiction authors in particular, need to be writing positive futures. So I don't mean utopian futures, but I do mean we need to be joining in the conversation of how do we get there from here? How do we get through the next 100 years? And that adage, if you can't see it, you can't be it, well, that really works for landscapes and politics as well. So for my own, as you will have noticed reading The Bride Price, it's quite a miserable collection of very miserable stories. You know, it's not a happy little book. And what I'm working on now is trying to envision positive futures, which are not Pollyanna utopias. But, for example, what would it be actually like to live with a universal basic income globally? Like, what might that look like? And so how do we unpack this? What is it going to be like when artificial intelligence starts taking control at a higher level? We already use them. They work on our stock markets. They do all sorts of stuff. When they start having more of a hold, which they will because we are not going to stop them. What is it going to be like when 1 billion people are on the move because of climate change and other associated effects? Because that's the projection for 2050. We're already seeing a lot of this now. How is it going to unpack, and what can we do to be part of a world that is not just a dystopia, is not a post-apocalypse nightmare? I mean, Lotus Blue did not deal with this. I sent my rich people underground. I mean, that was something I made up. It's a trope of science fiction. The people living in domes.
Right, and I was going to say that I actually really enjoyed that. You have, you call it. Oops, sorry, the camera gal was. Is the camera gal drunk again? Sorry,
yes,
camera
she is.
Gal.
She is quite drunk.
Careful over there.
Hey, camera girl.
Sorry to jump in here, but I was just going to pay you a compliment here that's warranted. What you call tropes, I mean, if I were to write the blurb on Lotus Blue, I can see 5 out of 10 people maybe saying, well, that's just an accumulation of tropes. There's sort of these intelligent weapons. There's sort of mechs and cyborgs. And then there's, of course, the rich people. They can afford to go behind walls and underground. And then the poor people are sort of relegated to traveling in the heat of the desert.
That's the world.
And exactly. So the way you wrap it into this story is very effective, and that is, to me, just want to say this because I studied jazz, and my jazz professor used to say, don't fear, listener and viewer, I'm not going to go on an extended anecdote, but my jazz professor in theory would say, like, you can play a diminished arpeggio over this chord. And then the saxophone player was saying, like, a diminished arpeggio? That's so boring. Everybody's done that since the 40s. And then the jazz guy, Joe Vieira, said, you know what? A diminished arpeggio in improvisation is like a good cup of coffee. It tastes good every morning. And so, the way you weave in these what you call tropes is incredibly effective, and that's what I want to talk to you later about, the process. Like, how do you actually approach this? Are you not afraid, like, oh my God, I'm stepping into a thing that's been overdone and whatever? But anyway, I completely interrupted you. Where were you going?
Oh, no, that's okay. One of the interesting things I discovered was I got a bunch of really great reviews for this book, and of course the reviews that I was most interested in were the ones written by science fiction academics, because these are the people who know all the stuff. And I had it pointed out at one moment that my book really harked back to Damnation Alley, Zelazny's Damnation Alley. And that's amazing because I had not read that book. And so I did read the book. I only read it last year or the year before. And, oh, my God, he was so right. It's like somehow I channeled this book without ever having read it. I mean, I'd seen the really dreadful film, which has nothing to do with the book. So, that was no help at all. But the idea of weaponized weather and, I mean, everything I wrote about in Lotus Blue is dragged out of real life one way or another, even though I wasn't aware of that some of the time when I was researching and writing it. the book took pretty much 10 years. I mean, not working on it all the time. And many of the bits that didn't end up in the book I repurposed as short stories, so set in the same landscape or alternate versions of the landscape. I think the reviewers who really understood this book, one person came up with the idea that when you watch the Mad Max movies, if you ever wondered what all the ordinary people were doing while that was going on, then that's my book.
Yeah.
And I
That
didn't
is
even
true.
consider it's so true, and I'd never even
true.
thought of it. I never thought of it. And another one that was given to me was it's basically Mad Max meets Ghost in the Shell. And again, completely true, but I did not think about it. I did not think about Mad Max even once when I was writing this book across 10 years. Didn't occur to me. To me,
And
this
also,
was more.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, go ahead. This was
No,
more.
it was more just touching on all the post-apocalypse things I'd read, the John Wyndham, John Christopher. It was like so much from that cozy catastrophe British tradition, yet filtered through this sort of crazy, desert landscape, which is Australia. Like, Australia is a big desert. Civilization clings to the coast. You can't just live anywhere, you know. That's why there's only 25 million of us. We're all just hanging on to the green bits. You know, and the desert motif is repeated a lot through Australian writing, and that's where I got it as well.
I wonder, in the process, what just came to me, you said this far into the future. I mean, it could very well be a completely different planet. I don't actually know how you weave in that it's recognizable as Australia, or if it's ever explicitly stated.
No, Australians can pick the clues. They're only in there for the Australians. There's a few name places and a few mentions of things, but otherwise, you're right, it could be another planet. I mean, of course, the biggest influence on this book, which it must be said, is Frank Herbert's Dune. This is my Dune tribute in many ways. The book was published in the year of my birth. I read it when I was about 14, and I thought it was real. I actually thought, that's the kind of kid I was. I just thought, oh my God, this is a secret history, and I've been given secret access because it was my dad's copy, and I remember he told me I wasn't old enough to read it, so of course I was like, I'm reading that book, you know.
Well, I mean, that's great, as long as you don't completely sort of fall into this weird. And later in your career, you know, I'm not making a projection, but Frank Herbert went down a weird sort of sexual rabbit hole with his stuff. And I have to say, I read a lot of stuff from the big guys. Good. That's good. Don't go further. Not one step further. But
I could feel the slip. It wasn't for me. Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff actually, you know, and again, our conversations here at the Drax Files Radio are in the best way all over the place. They're casual conversations, because now I need to mention that some of the stuff that I found really compelling as a youth, and the Conan book is here somewhere on the ground. My mother hated Conan because she thought it was total misogyny. But I talk about this all the time. Some of the 50s sci-fi is almost unbearable to read nowadays. Some of the stuff, like I read Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, and I mean, conceptually it's great, and there's a lot of good stuff, but it's also like, it is quite sexist, to be honest. It's just
it does seem that way. It is. Look, I mean,
have we moved on, Kat? Have we progressed?
We have so moved on. Like I mean, it started in the 60s, the new wave thing. I think it really lit a fire under our genre and made us step up to the plate. And I know that, well, I mean, it's amazing. You pick up any science fiction book today, and
it's very woke. Most stuff is very
woke.
sort of
Thank
woke,
you.
yeah.
That's the word I was fishing for there. There's such diversity. There is such... Anyone who now says that science fiction is a limited literature, all they're showing is that they haven't read anything written since the 50s.
I'm going to hold this into the camera real quick. This is Waist Tide by Chen Kui-fan, also goes by the name Stanley Chen. This is a Chinese author who is going to be my guest in October. We're going to meet up in the UK. He's on tour in the UK. This is absolutely fascinating. And here's another one. Sorry, Kat. That I mentioned other authors in your presence. Is that very rude of me? But I'm German. I don't have any sort of social etiquette. This is a book that I'm reading right now. Infinite Detail, also a must-read by, and here it falls down. Sorry, guys, I can't handle my own hands. But
You
anyways,
threw my books on the floor, Drax. So you know.
This is for the love of books. I throw them for the love.
Infinite Detail. Who wrote Infinite Detail?
Tim Maughan, and Infinite Detail
Yep,
is
I've heard this is
unbelievable.
great. I've heard this is fantastic. I heard about this a couple of days ago. Someone was telling me about it.
I would say it's the neuromancer of this moment in the sense that it combines. It's much more closer to reality than when you look at Neuromancer when it was written, you know, cyberspace. It was written in the 80s, so that was a long. I mean, it's still not realized in reality. Now the phone is ringing here in real life. I'm going to ignore it. Jesus Christ!
Phone.
But Infinite Detail is very, very near fiction. It's around the corner. It's totally possible, and it combines a critique of gentrification. Capitalism with a really compelling, fast-moving narrative. But I want to go back to you, Cap, but this is good because Infinite Detail is very near, Waste-Tide as well, but your stuff is set so far into the future now.
Well, it's about 500-600 years, yeah.
Well, that's a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
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 I wonder, this is a question I like to ask authors, when do you make this decision? Is this something that shifts during the process? You know, that where you go like, wait a minute, I should move this back or forth a little bit. And then for what reasons would that be when you construct something like that? You know, could be a short story, could be a novel. I guess it would apply to both.
I think when you're doing it's hard to say broadly, but with any writing project I do, it reveals itself. Like no matter what I might set out starting to do, it will change depending on what best fits the story. And I think it's really important to go with that. I don't try to hammer square pegs into round holes anymore. That just isn't. If I set out writing a story about one thing and it turns into a story about something else, then that's fine. It's about the story. The story is more important than me or my intent. At the end of the day, the story has a life of its own. So I wanted to write a post-apocalypse narrative because I love them, because I'd always been drawn to them. But it turned more into a climate fiction thing as I went because the PhD started bleeding into it. Mm-hmm. Like the idea had been to finish the novel and then engage with the PhD, but, you know, life doesn't always work out the way you want it to, and the two things just butted up against each other.
But so you're being led by the story. I mean, that's what authors and musicians always say too. You know, they come up with an idea and then they're led by the material.
But I'm led by the landscape too. The landscape reveals story. Mm-hmm. And I had to change point of view. I had to change the scope. I had to change so many things because I realized the world was the most interesting part of this. It's like the narrative is actually a very simple idea. You know, it's a bunch of people going somewhere to try and make something change. That's the story. It's like many action adventure stories are like that. But it's like, why? Why are they doing this? Why does it have to happen like this? What's at stake? And, you know, and I feel that I feel that most science fiction is actually not about the future. It's about what we're frightened about now.
Of course, yeah.
And so this is really, it became more resonant of today's problems. It started off, it started off as like, I want to write the thing I love, the trope I love, the landscape I love. And it turned into really being writing about our political restrictions today.
So you wanted to actually have sort of a nice escapist type of thing, like a little Mad Max, but with some romance in it, whatnot, that people can read on the beach. And then you did the PhD, and then the PhD said, "Wait a minute, you're wasting these pages. You got to infuse a little bit of responsibility and real world connection into this thing."
No, look, I don't think it was quite like that because if you've read my collection, you'll notice I'm always ranting on about something, and I'm a ranty person. I have opinions, and that's why I write. I literally have no use for a story which isn't trying to tell you something about the problems we live with, and I can't help that. That's just how it comes out.
But going back to the earlier thing, because that's the reason why I'm asking. I don't want to harp on this too much, but the decision of moving it up 500 years, 1,000 years, is that in your mind when you analyze your work or others? Is there possibly a danger, I guess, of when we're talking about dystopian fiction, where people say, Well, it's so far into the future. I mean, it's cool, but I don't have to worry about now. Or is this really then a matter of how do you actually infuse the issues? Because, like you said, I mean, it's all a metaphor. There's a fable aspect to it, and when with good writing, people should be able to, with good sci-fi, they should be able to get the point that, wait a minute, the writer is actually talking about the present, and it's irrelevant if it's 500 years or 3,000 years.
It's not irrelevant, though, because I needed time for certain evolutions to take place. So I needed erosion. I needed the Lotus Blue to be covered by the deserts. I needed the semi-sentient war machines time to evolve a little culture of their own, some pattern behavior. I needed time for the sand road to have been well established and successful and start to fade away. So all of these things I estimated roughly. I worked out a time frame, and I don't know if that's the right time frame, but it's what I ended up with. It felt right, I guess.
No, this is really good. I think aspiring writers who are watching this, folks, you need to, when you do world building, the world building needs to be realistic, and stuff just doesn't happen over the course of 5 years. It happens over the course of
generations. It needs to be three-dimensional, and you need time for it to settle and entropy to start setting in, because entropy is a big part of life.
So we have I'm going to weave in this question from the YouTube stream. Gridcorp asks, what do you think of the protopian idea? So I have not encountered the term protopia, and I can't Google it. Are you familiar with the term?
No, I'm not, and I'm not. So perhaps if that person would like to unpack that, I'd be really interested in hearing about that. So
Gridcorp, please, we're going to glance at the chat here. Why don't you Google this and send us a synopsis? I saw one article about utopia versus protopia. That'd be super interesting. Post it in the chat, and I'll bring it up. Now, Kat, you started writing. You had other careers before. You told me earlier that you actually studied film, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a career. I went to art
that's like
school.
when I studied sociology for 8 weeks, and I joke about this, like when I meet people in the park and I talk about like social issues, and they go like, "Oh, do you teach at university?" And I said, "No, I studied sociology for 8 weeks, but that's just the same thing."
I totally get that. Look, here's the thing. Like, so when I was Star Wars came out when I was 12, right? And it just blew my mind. 12 years old, I'd never seen anything like it, and that I knew that was my future somehow, right? And so I interpreted what that meant to me was that I wanted to be a filmmaker. So as soon as I left high school, and I went straight into art school, majoring in film. But the way I think about it, it's like it just wasn't working for me. I did film and photography. I'm still a photographer. I'm a pretty damn good photographer. Doing a lot of photography.
People should go to your website and check that out.
Yeah, and I've got back into it with a vengeance. But that's not the point of this story. When a little kid says they want to be a fireman or a firewoman, they want to do it because they like the shiny fire truck, not because they want to pull charred corpses out of buildings, right?
That's right.
And that was me with filmmaking. All I saw was the shiny, but I didn't like the process one little bit. I hated every single moment of it. I didn't like anything about all the equipment restrictions, and I really, really hated the other people in the class. So I realized
that is awesome. Wait a minute. Did you actually have to? Did you also hate that you had to basically direct people, that you had to deal with a lot of egos, that you had to stroke these egos in order to perform? Oh God, yeah.
There is a certain personality type that is on top of that. I have met those people. They rock. I did not rock in that particular category. So, age 21, I decided life's over. I'm failure. I'm not going to make Star Wars. It's all over. But photography was something I could make money out of, so I was able to do work, that kind of work, and get paid for it, and that was great. And I soon, by my mid-20s, had realised that I could make Star Wars on the page. That was my, I'd always loved science fiction. I was literally born loving science fiction. It was just, there's never not been science fiction in my life. It's just the way I came out. And so that was when I started on my writing journey. I'm also a graphic designer. That was how I was making my living before I got an arts grant and before I started the PhD. So At the moment, I've only just come crawling out of my PhD recovery phase, which is apparently completely normal to have no brain for a year after that. But
talk about really, law school. My wife is a lawyer.
Yeah, well,
that
there
takes
you go.
10 years out of you.
10
afterwards.
Years, yes. But so at the moment I'm back into the visual arts, and then I've got all these other projects lined up ready to go. I'm about to write a suite of near future positive stories set against climate change. So again, not utopia, but how are we going to get through? And that is, I do a lot of public speaking on this topic too, because I think we need to be out there showing that there is another way apart from cannibal apocalypse.
Wonderful. And GridCorp here, I'm going to look here at the chat. He just put in the delineation between dystopian, protopian, and such, and I think we addressed it a little bit. Dystopian projections of the future seem to do us more harm than good. Utopian projections seem to miss the sense of our current reality. Would protopian projections be a way forward? That's his question. And here he defines protopia is a state that is better today than yesterday, although it might be only a little better. Protopia is much harder to visualize because a protopia contains as many new problems as new benefits. This complex interaction of working and broken is very hard to predict. In other words, dystopian is too easy. And so, the way I see it, it's...
That's a great word. Thank you so much for that word. I'm going to do some research on that word.
Okay, and GridCorp here's, because this is a very opinionated show and I'm an opinionated guy. Protopia to me sounds a little bit like what Joe Biden suggests for solving the problems, which is just normalize everything. I do think we do need much more radical change. Yeah.
Wait, hello. That's a great word, radical. I'm up for this. I believe we actually need revolution. I think we need to actually start fighting back against our governments, and because they are not representing us. My country's government does not represent me. There is stuff going on in this country right now which is not okay. Not okay at all. This is not the country I grew up in, and I'm pretty sure many Americans would feel the same way about their own country at the moment. We have to start demanding sustainability as a long-term strategy. It's because we're going to die. Life on this planet is really important. As far as we know, we're the only planet in the universe with any life on it, as far as we know. And until we know otherwise, we have a great responsibility to protecting what we have. And I think this is more important than anything else.
Amen, and absolutely. I just wanted to say, folks on YouTube and Twitch, let us know if the audio deteriorates. If it indeed does, then we can go to a duplicate experience, which then the server is going to be restarting, which then clears up audio issues. Now, we switched into this protopia, utopian. By the way, thank you, GridCorp. I didn't mean to dismiss the idea. My 2 cents is what Kat said. I do think there is time for a revolution, and really sort of radical imagining is absolutely more than overdue. Absolutely, but I also think that our sort of neoliberal system is responsible for us for limiting the imagination. I think broadly, you can see that with the leaders. You see, absolutely. The leaders have all turned into middle managers a long time ago.
But the whole idea, it's like we have all these problems, and it's like the idea that it's too expensive to fix them, so we're just not going to do that. It's like, how can that be the answer? How can we be okay with that?
I think the choice between, I think that's really ridiculous. Absolutely agreed. I do wanted to talk a little bit more than how you got from the film idea to writing, and that would lead me to the next step, because you also bought stories to be published in magazines. So tell me about that process, because the reason why you're here and the reason why I was able to enjoy your stories is because of a good friend of mine, Eleanor Cayman Sands, aka Daisy Gator, who's also
Gator?
Here. She's in Sansar.
Daisy.
She's watching. Oh, Daisy here.
I haven't seen you on Facebook for ages.
Yeah, Daisy is building her own experiences here in Sansar. She has a wonderful experience. She's completely self-taught. We should go there sometime for sure.
I think we should, yeah.
Now, really important folks on YouTube, let me know if the audio is getting too bad. If so, then we'll take a portal and go to a different duplicate. But so yeah, Daisy told me about you and said, you know, you got to read this stuff. And then I read it and thank God she made this connection. Now, your job as somebody who has to, an editor for a magazine or for a publishing house, and you get just sent manuscripts and you have to plow through stuff that is probably between really, really bad and possibly good. Clark's World magazine tweeted the other day, this is true, that the Three-Body Problem, Xi Jing Liu's absolutely seminal novel, was submitted to them. Somebody submitted the Three-Body Problem, award-winning, as if they had written it. So tell me some horror stories from your former life as an editor.
Look, I don't know that you want to get me started down this road because I've blocked a lot of it out. But I was the fiction editor for Cosmos, Australia's Cosmos magazine, for 5 years, and aside from that, my partner Rob and I also ran our own small press, I think across 8 years, 2002 to 2008. It's not quite 8 years, but anyway. And we were publishing Australian speculative fiction stories because at the time there just weren't a lot of markets. So yes, we read a lot of slush material. If there are aspiring writers out there, I have one really important piece of advice. And that is read the freaking guidelines. I know it's the simplest thing that gets said all the time, but the amount of time that gets wasted by the wrong story being sent to the wrong market is just gobsmacking. Cosmos published a particular type of science fiction story, and I would get everything from tentacle porn through to just, I don't know, some unicorns or something. Like, there's a portal.
Right. Click on the portal and then go through it. We're going to meet up in a duplicate that looks exactly like this because the audio is deteriorating a little bit. I know you have a handler. Ask the handler. I think you have to click and then choose yes.
Drax's portal. Mike, I need to go through a portal.
So
yes,
you go through there.
Is that left or right, do you think? Do I have to physically move into it?
No, you have to click it. You have to click it with the trigger, and then...
The right trigger or the left trigger? Oh, Drax went. I think I...
All right, folks, I'm sorry for the disruption. Now you can see a little bit about how the sausage is made. Let me vamp a little bit.
Here we go. The Draxter is back. The Draxter is back. The Draxter has to go behind the microphone. And boom. So, look at this. All these other books are gone. Kat's books are gone, but some other books are here. Well, anyway, so as Kat is moving into this experience, I could actually probably teleport her as well. So bear with me. I'm going to go to the counter, and I will meet you there. I'm going to put us to a counter. abandoned the ship.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Let's try this again. I'm throwing to the intro clip, but we have to. You have to go through the portal with me.
There's no portal.
Okay?
It's gone.
No, the portal will disappear in just a few minutes. But you have in your private message, you can actually click on it now. You have it in your private message.
Where's my private message, Mike?
You have to go to desktop mode.
Left hand. Oh yes, that's right. Yes, private message is the little people. Oh yes, and that with the trigger finger. Oh, there's the portal. Yes, and I aim which one at it. The big button or the little button? Cool. Yep. Yep, it's there.
Portal, we need a different portal. Hold on. Disregard this portal and go through this one, please.
It's there now.
That was the wrong one.
It's jumping. It's right in front of my head. I could just stick my head in it.
Awesome. Viewers, please bear with us. We're getting there. And
Here we are. So I'm sorry about that. And let's hope that Cat gets this portal. Meantime, I will be vamping a little bit. Here we go. She's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome.
Are we back?
See. We are back, and we're cutting through to. Oh, you look almost as good as in the other one. I have lost 2 pounds due to stress, but that might be good.
Oh no.
No.
That's okay. There's the
No,
cat.
this is
I've got the space cat back.
the space cat is back. Wave to the camera, if you will. Here she is on the other side. There we go.
I got lost
Awesome.
in hyperspace. I fell through the cracks, through a wormhole.
Now, where were we conversationally? We were talking about publishing, and you don't have to go into it that much, but you were saying that apparently most people don't pay attention to the
guidelines.
Whoops.
They really don't. They
You're
just don't. And it drives editors completely bonkers because you've got to sift through all this stuff that has nothing to do with what you're publishing.
Right.
And so if people you could just save so much time if you only sent a science fiction story, for example, to a science fiction market. You know, it seems so simple, but 80% of what I'd get through general admissions was just not appropriate. So
Right. So then I won't open those traumatic wounds for you.
No, I'm still twitching. Yeah.
We're going to a question from Daisy Gator. She says, "What did you learn in writing your first novel that transitioned from short story to novel?" And I know that Daisy is working on a longer form now. We talked about that, and she's, you know, with any good thing, you struggle with it. But what is sort of the most, like when you transition from short story to a novel?
Okay, this is a really great question, and because this is where I tripped up completely. This is why it took me 10 years to write one freaking book, right? A lot of authors write.
But when you mean 10
books.
years, do you really mean you had this? Do you mean you this was sort of what is the term, germinating, or did you actually sit down?
No, it wasn't 10 years working every day. No, nothing like that. But the point is, and this is what you've got to figure out, is that it's a completely different form, a short story and a novel. They are different forms in the same way football is different from ice skating, right? They're both sports. You need to be fit, and there are rules, and that's where all the similarities go, right? A novel is not a really long story. The rhythm is different, the infrastructure is different, everything is different. There's a different set of parameters. And I did not really understand this because I'd written short fiction for so long and I was writing short fiction all the time through while I was writing Lotus Blue, and I just didn't get that I had all the beats were off. I didn't really get that. And I could have solved a lot of these problems by reading a lot more material out there telling me about the form. But I didn't think I needed to read that stuff because, in fact, I did read a lot of that stuff. I wasn't sinking in because I thought, well, I've been writing for 20 years. Of course I know what I'm doing. So I think it is really worth you taking the time to read some books on how to structure long form narratives. I think it would just have saved me years if I had been a bit more of a better student on that level.
But writing a novel is not just inserting a little bit more interior monologue and a little longer descriptions of the landscape.
Certainly isn't. No, it really isn't. And of course, now I need to write another novel, and it's like, well, it's not going to be like that last one, is it? You know, I mean, there is no rule. Yep. There is not a formula that. Certainly there are writers who write to formula, but you have to find your own path. But there are certainly delivering 100,000 words or 132,000, as Lotus Blue was. I keep coming back to the word rhythm. I think it is like working where the beats go and working out the shape of it. The shape is very important. Whereas a short story is really one idea executed cleanly. It does not. You are very limited with what you can do in the space, and so you're painting big pictures with a few strokes, and you have to have all of that infrastructure baked in if you are in a novel length work. So it's a tough road. If someone had been able to convince me how tough it would have been for me personally, I wouldn't have done it. Now, hopefully, Daisy, that's not going to happen to you. And there's certainly other people that sail through, right? It's just this is a me thing. but I feel that it's good advice anyway.
But do you feel you have to, because you said you have to write another novel? I mean, would it look strange that after this one you would go back to short story? Are you worried about public perception, or is there sort of unwritten rules of, I don't know, how people are perceived in terms of career and success? Like, oh, she went back to short stories, there must be something wrong. I mean, is this sort of like...
I'm not worried about what anybody else thinks about anything. I think the problem these days...
That is a good attitude. Kids, listen to that one. That's good. That's good advice right there.
Comes down to what do you want to do with your life. And I want to write a few more novels. I want to write more short stories. I want to do a bunch of photography, and I have another art project which is combining all of these things together, which it will be impossible to sell. So, and that's the one I'm really into at the moment. So
sounds like an immersive virtual world where people can congregate and be inside the novel.
Look, and you know what? Maybe in 5 or 10 years, I might even be changing that. I mean, it depends what you want, right? And what I want is just to be a part of it, be a part of the broad landscape, be a part of the conversation. I want to add my very loud and opinionated voice to everything. That's just how and this is the way I feel I can do this, whereas filmmaking for me was not the way.
You have too many ideas. That's very
too
unhealthy.
Many ideas. Lots of things to do. Some of them are short ideas. Some of them are long ideas. But this is what I want to do with my time on Earth. And so I think a really important thing to do is figure out what do you want to do with your time on Earth, and then how do you action that. It's not about should I write a novel because everyone writes a novel. Apparently, I've been told that most authors only write one book, and I don't know if that's true, but that seems to be a thing. I'm hoping I'm not one of those. I hope
I can tell you, this guy who was visiting here, Tad Williams, he writes, his books are 600, 700, 800 pages. They had to split the last one of the Memory Soaring Thorn into 2 paperbacks because it would have collapsed. Kat, real quick, because we're going towards the end of our hour, and 2 more questions from Daisy. Those are good questions. As a multi-award winning editor, those are Daisy is a big fan, as am I. Now, did you have to switch off the editor brain when you're writing? So that's something that I also want to know. And more broadly, when you write and when you are alone with your work, what are do you have any tricks that you can share? How do you shut off the critical brain? Because of course you need to be critical of your own work, but it cannot be debilitating or paralyzing, and that is something that people outside of the process they have a hard time understanding, because they go like, you have such a great life, you can just sit there and just create stuff. Isn't that awesome?
But it's not about time in the saddle, it's about words on the page. And what I find I have to do, I've been blocked for pretty much a whole year since coming out of the PhD. I couldn't even write my name after that. Like, it was just too hard. But I'm getting back into it now, and for me it's all about being in the right frame of mind, and I'm a big fan of the brain fart approach. It's like, you don't edit as you write, you come back to it. I make multiple passes over the page. The first thing, when I start, I often start in the middle of a conversation. I don't even know who the characters are yet. I just start with dialogue and it comes out from that. What's important is you get something down, and then it shapes, and then it takes on a life and an energy of its own, and then it's all about rhythm. It's like a dance. It's like drumming. It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's not, you can't be picky about your word choices. You just have to go with the flow. It becomes an emotional outpouring, and then you trim it and manicure it and poke it and prod it and give it a appendectomy later. All of that is later. Editing is later. And then you have an actual editor to work with even after that.
So you go through it quickly. The first thing you just write. You put stuff on the page. Get it out there. Yeah, that's great advice. Daisy also asked, what was it like to work with Margaret Atwood? You had what relationship did you have with Margaret Atwood? Maybe summarize that real quick and tell us.
I was her student, right? I was Key West, 2012. She was doing a class.
Wait, hold on. If people don't know, people don't read, and they don't know who Margaret Atwood is. Margaret Atwood did a Netflix show about these weird hatted. No, she's. I'm sorry. This is very cynical.
I'm sure everybody knows who she is. She was fabulous. I got to say. Look, literally, I think it was my first day on Twitter. I'd never, 2011. I popped on Twitter, and a friend just sent forward the message that Atwood was teaching at Key West, and I thought, I've got to go. I had no money. I didn't know how to get there. I didn't have anything, but I applied, and I was accepted. And it was like, how do I get there? So I applied for a government grant to write Lotus Blue and to go, and I got it. And so I went there. Ms. Atwood is very small, and she's very powerful. She's like Yoda. And we were all terrified of her, but she's absolutely fabulous. And there's a couple of lines she added to the first chapter of Lotus Blue, which I fought to keep in there just because she wrote them. Like, I changed the whole book since that experience. But yeah, and remember, it's her words. We can end on this, perhaps. It is not climate change. It is everything change. Everything will be affected by this. Artists have to respond. We have our part to play in building a sustainable future.
Wonderful, Kat. So the takeaway of this conversation, and thank you, Daisy, for asking us a question. We have just 3-4 more minutes left. If there's any questions, shoot them now quickly, YouTube folks. So what I get away from the conversation with you here, Kat, is that there is a responsibility that writers do have in this day and age to take a stand, to have a position on the issues. Is there legitimacy at all in your mind for what generally would be called escapism?
Of course there is. I think we have to make, like I was saying before, we have to make our choices. Escapism is necessary too. We need a buffer zone. We need a safe place. We need to be able to gather our strength. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use those traditional areas at all, but I think it's more important. Well, I'm not going to tell anyone else what's right. It's.
I will tell people with my opinionated self. I'll tell people, guys, if you have a platform, that doesn't mean you have to infuse it in your work.
Switch off. Readers switch off if it's too much hardcore. Not everybody wants to learn and grow and struggle all the time. We need our little buffer zones. Hey, I watch Netflix too. I'm the same. I'm a really normal person. Really ordinary person. I got the same flaws as everyone else.
Oh my God, you're never invited again here, Kat. You're too normal.
But what I do think is that the idea that that whole modernist interiority thing, it's like, I think that's become boring while the planet's on fire. We don't, we have got to, and all fiction will be climate fiction, literally because it's going on around us in a normal way. We need to find ways of just coping with the stress of living through this particular time. I mean, so many of my friends are advising their own children not to have children. Has this ever happened before in the history of our cultures? I don't know, but I'd be surprised if it had. Like, children are the future. People, that's why, this whole projection, it's immortality, having children, living forward. And now people are starting to say, I'm too frightened for even the possibility of you doing this. It's like, things are really different now, where our planet has not faced this before. Right. We've had mass extinction events before, but not one we made ourselves.
All I wanted to suggest is that you make a great point, and thank you, Kat, and we're wrapping the program. I wanted to suggest that if you are a writer, or if you're a public person, or if you have any sort of publicity about yourself and your work, I think that's my personal opinion. I think you can provide good entertainment. You can provide even what could be coined escapist entertainment. But what I think is important is that when you have the opportunity to speak to the public in an interview situation or a panel discussion, even when it's just about your work, I do think people with a certain sizable platform, they owe it to themselves to be vocal about the issues of the day, including the climate catastrophe. You see, that's what I'm saying. I think you can't go out there and be like, yeah, I'm a sports star who makes X million of dollars, and people, you know, I have 5 million Twitter followers, and I'm only going to talk about breakfast. Or you know,
look, I agree. But
that's what
for
I mean.
me, I don't have a massive platform, but I can't turn it off. I literally can't not talk about these things.
Right.
I have nothing else to talk about really that I feel is worth talking about. That's me.
That's depressing. Do you get invited to dinner parties at all?
I do.
I'm just joking.
I get invited everywhere. I don't know why, but you know, no, I just, and it's funny because I have one friend who she's so over it, and she's like, and she's fab, but she's like, I'll have a few wines and start banging on, and she's like, oh, show me some photos of your cats, you know, like.
Oh, she's bringing you back to the cats.
Yeah,
that's good.
Like, shut up! I don't want to hear this anymore. I'm on the same side. I'm on the same team. But yeah.
That's a subtle sort of like, you know, and then you can go, well, those cats would suffer tremendously with the climate crisis. Where would they get their food? Exactly.
Where would they get? Who's going to open the little cans for them in the apocalypse? That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Kat. This is a wonderful conversation, and big thanks to Mike, who is hosting you with the VR. And I know how hard it is to be in this, you know, with the sweaty headset for this amount of time. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much to endure this. And we wish you all the best. And catsparks.net is the website. Follow Kat on Twitter. Look at my photos. Wonderful.
They're awesome.
Look at the photos. The photos are positive, and then of course the wording underneath is very depressing. So you get both in one big stroke.
Covering all bases. Yeah.
Next on the show next week is going to be Laura Donnelly, author of the Amberlow trilogy, and then the week after that, we're in a total marathon, is Xenia Anske, who is writing super dark stuff, but who is a very cheerful person. So we're going to see if why that is. What her problem is in the Dr. Drax program. That's it, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks for the question. Thank you, Solus, for the dress. Thank you, Granddad, for scripting the camera. Thank you, Linden Lab, for keeping the engine going. And goodbye, Kat. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.